Thank you. Thanks so much for having me. I love being here, and I'm very honored to be here as well and to join for this great series of talks. I'm going to talk in my presentation about the book itself and what I discovered over the years of research that I've put into it, and then what made it into the final book that you see depicted on the left of the screen. So when I was a student, I was sort of encapsulated by, or well, actually I was already a junior teacher. I was encapsulated by this image of the octopus that grabs everything in its reach and holds power over finances, over our personal feelings, over democratic discourse and elections, and even real estate. And I was really thinking, wow, what a daunting challenge. But then I realized when you make everything look like a giant octopus, you can make everything look scary. So I wanted to peel back the curtain and look, okay, is big tech and the state of competition in digital markets really as dire as this image makes it seem? Or is it actually much more susceptible to nuance? Well, I think by now many will agree that the octopus was an excellent depiction, and even if you pull back the curtain, it is still a very daunting challenge to regulate the digital giants. But in order to better understand what digital competition actually is and how we should approach it in competition law and regulation, I looked at three distinct elements of the issue. So the book is in three parts: the competitor, where I go into depth about what exactly are platforms, what are ecosystems, how do they operate, what are their economic characteristics; the competition, so what changes when you talk about ecosystem competition compared to market competition; and the regulation, where I make a proposal on how to regulate it. And I think that while the regulatory framework might be a bit complex to bring into practice, it does show that we need to approach the problem of ecosystem competition failures in a holistic way, and we cannot only look at the level of the platform. So when I looked at the competitor, I wanted to find out what is a digital platform, and I started from the idea of, is a digital platform a natural monopoly, or can it be a natural monopoly? Is competition so imperfect that these platforms will always monopolize irrespective of whether anti-competitive behavior happens? So normal competition, you go to a store where you buy your apples, and you can choose between supermarket A, B, and C, and they have different prices, and that's the end of your transaction. But how do these digital undertakings actually compete, and what is their role in shaping the perception and experience of users? So platforms are defined by the fact that they intermediate between a buyer and a seller. Now, when you want to buy your apple and you want to reach these three stores, you go to Amazon.com. They connect you to various buyers and sellers, and in principle, you want to find your best matching offer. So more competition on platforms is better. Of course, since sellers are a part of this platform, they can also choose to become advertisers. So they can pay Amazon to be placed more prominently, to have a better ranking perhaps. So in the end, there is an additional layer of transaction. And this already shows that these platforms can fulfill multiple functionalities for their sellers, but also that they are the ones who set the price and the terms and conditions for sellers to access buyers. They have the ability to preference one seller over another, to promote their offering to one buyer over another, irrespective of whether that is actually a better fit. This makes the role of an intermediary very important and also very susceptible to things like bias and discrimination. Now, platforms are rarely just platforms, but usually they're integrated into these multi-actor and multi-product ecosystems. A multi-actor ecosystem consists of the platform and its operator, the buyers and sellers and other business users on that platform, and the end users. And all these parties together co-generate value for each other. More buyers means a better offering for sellers, or means a better market for sellers, and more sellers means a better offering for buyers. So the better competition is on the platform, the more they can serve various types of demand, and the better the platform is perceived by all parties. This means that when competition on a platform improves, there's actually a move towards monopolization of that platform because it becomes the go-to place to get your products. Once a platform has captured a sufficient market share and they can monetize it properly, they can start expanding. And they expand into multi-product ecosystems. And we basically see that all platform operators do this eventually. And I ask myself, why exactly do they always do this? So first, I wondered, is the platform a natural monopoly? And I found probably in some cases it is, like search, and in many cases, at least, it's heavily imperfectly competitive, which means that there is a tendency towards concentration. I attribute these to increasing returns to scale, which means that the more of something you produce, the lower your marginal cost of production become. And I think here it is, if you have the long tail of demand, so niche products, when you are a starting platform, it's hard to serve the niche products, but especially as you grow, it becomes easier to have a very expensive category because you have no shelf costs and you can have basically anything that there is demand for you can supply. The bigger you are, the easier that becomes. There are economies of scope, which means that if you're active in multiple markets, you have cost-saving efficiencies. And then there are data-driven network externalities. Now, what makes digital markets unique is that normally we see network externalities that they are on the demand side. So if you have a phone, then the value of the phone on the demand side is determined by how many people you can call. So more users of the same phone network makes it more valuable, but it doesn't inherently improve the quality of the phoning service itself. In digital markets, however, we know that if you have more demand, your supply is also better. If you have more demand from buyers, you can supply a better intermediation service to sellers. If you have more sellers, you can better fulfill the demand of buyers. So the more demand on either side also creates supply-side efficiencies. These are further exacerbated by the presence of data. Data helps you to improve your services, to improve your offering, to personalize services, and you can only collect this data, or best collect this data, if you have more interactions with the platform. So here we see that the demand-side network externality creates a supply-side improvement of the good itself. Now, digital platforms are also unique because the digital goods are modular, meaning you can take a part of one digital good and transfer it to the development of another, and they're information goods. Information goods are produced at zero cost, and that means you can use abundance strategies. So what a platform can do, what many old school stores could not do, is simply flood the market with free giveaways, with low prices, with all kinds of information that may be irrelevant, because they know the more we offer, the more we are likely to attract new users. So you have this self-reinforcing feedback loop where the bigger you become, the more people you can reach, the more things you can disseminate, and ultimately that draws people into your network and into your ecosystem. Now, the game, when you are a platform operator, is that you want to integrate yourself into the digital value stack in multiple parts. So you have your digital platform, and at some point you want to make sure that you anchor yourself in the tech stack. The more fundamental you are in the technology stack, in the value chain, the harder it is to displace your platform. So in the end, if you are just a standalone platform, and I'm going to use the example of OpenAI's ChatGPT quite a bit throughout the presentation, you can start to offer your service for free and you try to find a way to monetize it. But ultimately, as long as you don't have a more foundational position, you are still very susceptible to challenges from outside. Even though ChatGPT was the most popular large language model for a while, it is actually in trouble already because it's not achieving its goal of becoming more fundamental in its tech stack. I'm going to talk about that a little bit. But that means that to integrate upstream or downstream, or to expand horizontally is actually a vital part of the survival strategy of a digital firm. And therefore, I find that because the economic characteristics facilitate it, and because the survival of the company depends on its ability to expand, expansion into a multi-product ecosystem is inevitable for platform operators. And I think therefore we need to reconceptualize how we think about platforms, because we always think about a platform, or not always, but many people think about the platform at a platform level. And the Digital Markets Act also takes this approach. It identifies a number of core platform services, and then it regulates specifically that core platform. But even a monopoly in a platform market is only as strong as the moat that it builds around that platform through expansion into new markets and by leveraging its power from one market to another. Now, I think two types of expansion are highly relevant. One is on-platform expansion. So if you offer simply a search engine and 10 blue links, that is one thing. If you expand that search engine to include direct links to maps, to images, to videos, and to advertisement, and you integrate it into more and more markets, making it essential to that, then you are creating or you're heightening the value of the platform service itself. This allows you to retain the users that you already have and to monetize those users better. But equally important is cross-platform expansion. So sometimes you find that there is a natural connection to another product or service that doesn't integrate well with your platform, and you launch a new platform or you acquire a new platform to grow your user base. And while on-platform expansion is very good to maintain your users, cross-platform expansion helps you to attract new users. So ultimately, there is an automatic or inherent process of experimentation where a platform operator starts developing or looking to develop functionalities that either it can integrate, and if it cannot integrate, it can spin them off, it can connect them, and it can start connecting user bases and infrastructures to each other. So how does that influence competition? And this is, I believe, the theory of Jacobidis and Janos visualized. So there is competition at various levels. Inter-ecosystem competition is competition between different types of ecosystems. So between Apple and Google. They do not simply compete in only the market for app stores and play stores, but they compete with each other in a number of connected markets, including payment systems, web browsers, operating systems. So there's a lot of moving parts in this kind of competition. The strength of an ecosystem in its first instance is determined by its intra-ecosystem competition. Intra-ecosystem competition is the competition that happens between software developers that want to proliferate their apps through the App Store, or the drivers that drive for Uber or Lyft. When you are just a platform and you have only the intermediation service, you're very dependent on your business users to generate value for you. The more you grow and the more you expand into various income streams, the less dependent you become on that intra-ecosystem competition and the more power you gain over your users. Vertical ecosystem competition happens between the platform operator and the business user. So in the beginning, Apple is heavily dependent on app developers to offer their apps, and it tries to give them attractive terms and conditions to do so and attractive prices. We saw this very clearly also with Uber, which offered very low prices to passengers in the beginning and quite high rewards to drivers. When inter-ecosystem competition is a credible threat, they know that a driver that is not paid well can leave to a competitor. So they are prone to over-rewarding the drivers and over-rewarding the end users. However, as inter-ecosystem competition diminishes, the drivers have less choice to go to a competitor, or their networks are less elaborate, so they can no longer leave. That is a perfect opportunity for the platform operator to start vertically integrating, to give strategic direction to its ecosystem and to draw more value from it. But it comes at the cost of the benefits that were once enjoyed by consumers and customers. So we see that these three types of power are interrelated. In the beginning, developing inter-ecosystem depends on whether you can attract intra-ecosystem competition. Then, once inter-ecosystem diminishes, you no longer need intra-ecosystem competition as much because you know how many users you need to fulfill your demand. And then as soon as you know this, you can start to vertically integrate to make sure that you occupy points that are either strategic for your future expansion or very valuable. So the balancing act for platforms requires them to be efficient and pro-competitive until they get too big. Now, this inter-ecosystem competition ultimately comes down to a very fundamental question. Who has the power to reach buyers, sellers, and advertisers? Or who has the power to reach business users? because ultimately new entrants in the market, they become dependent on the infrastructure of one large ecosystem operator or another to reach any of these users on either any side of the market. And as a result, if they want to grow their platform, they will have to negotiate with the incumbent ecosystem operators. That means that these large ecosystem operators have a huge influence over who can actually enter the market and who cannot. So already with the challenge of overcoming this chicken and egg problem that we have for platformers, where you need to attract users on multiple sides of the market at the same time, you now also need to navigate the existing power structures to see if you can actually make it to the point where you can even contact any of these users. Ecosystem power is then a multifaceted approach to power that goes beyond market power. And I would say that power in inter-ecosystem competition is the power to leverage your resources, users, and finances to enter into a new position and to expand your ecosystem indefinitely, but also the power to foreclose entry into the digital network industry and to preempt the disruption for newcomers. So because you now hold so many keys to or key access points to the digital network industry, you become able to select who will sustain my business model and who will hinder my business model. And you start to block those that hinder your business model and support those that sustain your businesses. To have power in intra-ecosystem competition, you need to have power in inter-ecosystem competition. And I think power in intra-ecosystem competition exhibits itself as the power to foreclose certain business users and promote others through your power over processes and your positional power. And then vertical ecosystem power is how well are you able to vertically integrate, to give strategic direction, to extract profits, to then grow your power further in inter-ecosystem competition. On the basis of this conceptual framework, I started to assess, okay, when can we speak of a competitive or a healthy digital network industry, and when does it go sour? When does it become anti-competitive? I separate 4 phases based on what I just explained. The first is emergence. There's a new platform operator. They want to capture a market. They want to become the monopolist. But in order to do so, to use these abundance strategies, they have to handsomely reward everyone involved. Pay high prices for services rendered, offer low price to consumers. So they're often loss leading and heavily loss leading. And then, once they've captured that monopoly, they need to start expanding. They go into new products and services. They try to find out what works best for users, what are good business models, and they try to be disruptive so that they can also capture users from already existing platform services. Again, very positive for users. The third phase is maturity. Here, the rewards for users start to diminish because the ecosystem has to become profitable at some point. You cannot be a loss leader forever. Shareholders have to be rewarded, and you have to have some kind of viable long-term business strategy. So while this is a natural part of platform expansion, this is where consumer welfare starts to diminish. And then finally, once you have few mature ecosystems that have established a sort of equilibrium in a network and become too big to fail, they no longer have to reward users or sellers at all because they have the resources and the finances to replace any service previously offered by third parties. And they can also force assimilate or die strategies on newcomers. And I think this is the part where their mere presence already inherently harms innovation and consumers. So just like dominance in a market, the presence of large incumbent ecosystem power inherently weakens the structure of the very digital network industry itself. I think ChatGPT is a beautiful example of this because it's so ongoing and because it shows what tends to happen in every market. OpenAI's ChatGPT, everybody loves it for the first few months. It does something totally new, it's promoted, people start adopting it, they lean into this and they capture a huge market. They finally have all these users, but they actually have no idea how they're going to monetize this. The first thing they try to do is try to anchor themselves and to try to provide disruptive services. They come up with AI-based search. They have these foundational models that they want to license. They come up with all kinds of strategies to monetize. Then, because they are still in this phase of capturing users in these markets, they again give away a lot for free. Now, we come to the point where they have to be able to mature. So, in 2025, they had significant billion-dollar losses. and they are facing, or they're staring down the barrel of inevitable bankruptcy. So this would be the time where they start using aggressive monetization strategies. And if there was no credible competitor, they could have done this, provided that their service is good enough. But instead of having no credible competitor, we have Google Gemini. So in the end, now ChatGPT has to be monetized through advertising and through subscription services to be viable. But since Google has a near infinite amount of resources, they simply leverage Gemini into the public opinion. They offer it for free, and it's so easy to use because the quality is as high. I don't know if it exactly is. And people already know Google. They can integrate it into a bunch of things. So the more OpenAI tries to monetize, the harder it becomes for them to be a credible competitor to Google. And ultimately, if they don't make the shift towards maturity, we'll end up with just having Google Gemini. And we saw this with voice assistants. We see it with virtual reality. We basically see it in every potentially disruptive market that the incumbent starts investing when there's entry. Then once the entry is foreclosed, they stop investing in it. And we end up with a lackluster product that could have been good if there was time to develop it. So what these big ecosystem operators basically do is they build their infrastructures to make sure that if you want to reach any advertiser, buyer, or seller, you have to go through them. And if you don't align with their business model, you're excluded. Now, for the sake of time, I want to shift to the regulation. The regulatory framework that I came up with, I developed when the DMA and the DMCCA were already being considered. The DMA was also just implemented, but there wasn't actually that much in terms of digital regulation to compare it with. But of course, the DMA was a helpful benchmark to know what are we doing and where can we go. So I wanted to develop a system of ecosystem regulation based on my conceptual analysis in the thesis. And I came up with a 3-layered system, which is having an entrant pool, a lightly regulated pool, and a heavily regulated pool of entities. The heavily regulated pool is subjected to very, very heavy burdens, extremely heavy regulatory burdens that are rules-based. The lightly regulated pool is subjected to principles-based and tailor-made regulatory burdens. And the entrant pool does not face any regulatory burdens, but instead receives benefits and protections in competition. The idea underlying this is that in principle, you want ecosystems of a relatively equal size to compete with each other freely, but the only thing you want to prevent is that ecosystems become too big. So in the regulatory framework, I propose that if you are in the heavily regulated pool, you can compete freely with others in the heavily regulated pool. If you're in a lightly regulated pool, you can compete freely with others in the lightly regulated pool. And the same goes for the entrant pool, where you can freely compete with each other, enjoying these benefits. The idea is now that if you are a very heavily regulated entity because of the size of your ecosystem, and you're only able to freely compete with others of that size while you have to afford all these benefits to smaller firms, at some point it becomes attractive for you to think, if I divest a part of my business, I can qualify for the lightly regulated pool, and I can start being deregulated, but it also opens up this huge venue of free competition for me with others that are close to me, that are close competitors to me. So entry in the lightly regulated pool not only reduces your regulatory burden, but it also relieves you of your regulatory burdens towards those that are in phase 2 or 3. And I think that would create actual incentives for the largest incumbent ecosystems to start releasing parts of their ecosystem through divestment or to really open up for competition, because they know that there is an end game. They know that if they do comply effectively or if they do divest part of their business, it actually means that they stand to materially benefit from that. And I think that is something that we are maybe missing in the Digital Markets Act. Now firms have to comply because they're gatekeepers, but there's actually no real benefit for them to comply outside of not facing fines potentially. In this case, the regulatory burdens are intended to be so heavy that it is more cost efficient to comply or divest than it is to continue to remain in the heavily regulated pool. I think that's it in a nutshell. Then in the lightly regulated pool, you still have to give some benefits to entrants, but you can compete freely with those above you. but you at least never have to give any sort of access to those that are already stronger than you or those that are equal to you. Because I think in the DMA, again, one problematic issue for me is Booking.com and Google are subjected to the same set of regulatory obligations. Of course, they are affected differently depending on the size of the ecosystem, but there is no way that you could credibly argue that Booking is a gatekeeper in the same way that Google is a gatekeeper at the firm level. They simply do not have the same power over resources or investments. So I think this is actually a much fairer way to conceptualize where these firms are in their competitive process and position and how they relate to others in the network industry. I don't want to go into this too deeply because there's a lot of ifs and buts and angles, and ultimately I discuss those in the book. But this is the core system, and then the idea would be that if you change over time, you are either shifted from one pool to another. So you're either in the entrant pool, you grow and you become lightly regulated and you have to stand on your own 2 feet, or you're in the heavily regulated pool, you divest and you get your freedom to compete back. Now, I think to conclude, the novelty of progressive ecosystem regulation is that it looks at imbalances of power between ecosystems as the source of harm. It offers a higher level of flexibility and it can be phased out gradually. And it comes on top of the idea that it works more to shape the incentives of those that are the target of regulation. By helping the entrant, but making sure that they are eventually entered into the lightly regulated pool, you give them the pressure to develop sustainable business models while getting helped out during the chicken and egg problem. And for the heavily regulated entities, you offer a way out of being endlessly targeted. So the key takeaways from my book are: platforms tend to monopolize, but this is not necessarily bad when you take the ecosystem perspective. Competition, important competition, happens between multi-product ecosystems, and strong inter-ecosystem competition will also create benefits for intra-ecosystem competition. And regulating ecosystems needs a different approach than regulating digital markets. So I think that's my presentation, my prepared talk, and now I'm very excited for the discussion to be had.